Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Safinah Danish Elahi. I'm a novelist and also a publisher. With us today is Shehan Karunatilaka from Sri Lanka. Welcome, Shehan.
Thank you.
Shehan is the author of Chinaman, The Legend of Pradeep Matthew, and which has won the DSC Asian Fiction Prize for Literature and the Commonwealth Book Prize. And more recently, Shehan is also the winner of the Booker Prize 2022. And we're very, very pleased to have you. Shehan also has his new book come out of short fiction, The Birth Lottery and Other Surprises. So let's just, I'm just going to begin talking to you a little bit, and I'm going to ask you a very original question. I'm sure you haven't been asked this before. How does it feel like to be the Booker Prize winner?
Oh, wow. I've only been asked that like 70 times. This is 71st. Well, look, this book took a long time to write. We can talk about how long it took. It took, a good part of 7 years. And many, many rewrites, many conversations saying, this book, it's complicated. You may not find a publisher outside of the subcontinent. And finally got it done, got this, this is the Pakistan version. Safinah, thank you for getting this out so quickly. And this was the original. And it was done in, I think, end of December 2021, and I kind of send it out into the world, and you have this moment when you finish writing where you think, okay, I've done my best with this thing, maybe no one will read it, but it'll go out there and let it have its fate in the world. And then obviously Sri Lanka's had a bizarre year, to put it mildly, 2022, and I was caught up in all that drama, standing in petrol queues, storming the president's palace and all of that. And in the midst of this, I knew the book was coming out in August. But again, there wasn't a big rush to review it, especially outside of the subcontinent. And then in August, while my wife was in a 4-day petrol queue, and I was taking the kids to class, I got this elated phone call saying, yeah, we've been longlisted for the Booker. And I couldn't really celebrate at my kids' class, but I did think, okay, fine, at least now it'll get reviewed. And then, the dice rolled again and a 6 came up and I made the short list. And then I knew, okay, I get to travel to London and do some scary panels and all that. But at least, the book's now going to get a proper launch. So that was the mindset I was in throughout. And I remember the day of the Booker thinking, well, it's a 1 in 6 chance. And it was a tremendous long list. It was a very creative and, there were a lot of weird books there. There are a lot of fine books there as well. So again, it's a dice roll, a 1 in 6 chance. So I thought, okay, I just have to wear a suit, shake a few hands, and then someone else's name gets called and I get to go home and have a holiday. And of course, that's not what happened. And it's been very strange because since then this is my 10th Lit Fest in 10 weeks.
I was just going to ask
I'm pretty
that,
tired
has it
of
been
hearing
surreal,
myself talk.
Because you kind of, you're kind of in your own zone when you're writing, and then suddenly you're the Booker Prize winner and the whole world knows you.
No, so this is the point. I mean, you spend, as a writer, you're in a room by yourself, and you spend, 8-9 hours a day there. If you're in a good mood, you might talk to your kids, maybe your wife, but most of the time you're talking to yourself. You're talking to imaginary characters. You're talking to ghosts. And then I remember the 24 hours or the 48 hours after Booker, it was just relentless interviews and photo shoots and scary things like that. And look, it's had time now. It's been a few months. And, I don't mean to sound ungrateful for this because, it is a tremendous thing. My first book, Chinaman did relatively well. But, it was sold modestly, and I think it won a few prizes, was a cult success. But I still had to work a day job, and I was working my day job as a copywriter up till a few months ago. And so then suddenly to get this tremendous attention, and the book's going to be published in multiple languages, and now I'm traveling around talking about it. It is wonderful, but I am looking forward to going back to my boring life of sitting in a room and not talking to anyone, because That's where I'm happiest, and that's where you naturally are. But no, it's been a hell of a ride, and what a year it's been, from Sri Lanka's crises, dealing with that, to this, and then now I'm traveling around talking, and this book has traveled further than I thought.
And how do you, you mentioned that, you know, your wife was in a queue and there was so much happening while you were writing it as well. How do you sort of camp yourself and focus on the craft of writing? Because, I mean, obviously, you know, real life kind of plays into your daily routine. How difficult is it to zone out of what's going on? Or do you take that and kind of immerse it in your writing?
So the thing is, when you're sitting in Colombo writing strange stories about left-arm leg spinners who played for Sri Lanka in '87, you don't expect to be on Oprah's book club or be, you know, this thing is going to be read around the world. You're thinking, and what I was thinking is, this is an interesting story, because I mean, I've been fascinated with mystery spinners ever since, you know, I failed as a cricketer. I'd been watching Sri Lanka. We have a shortage of petrol, gas, competent leaders, but we seem to have an assembly line.
We can relate to that.
Yes, and you have an assembly line of fast bowlers. We have an assembly line of mystery spinners. Somehow we seem to produce them. So anyway, when you're writing this, you don't think of yourself as having a writing career. I just remember thinking, this is an interesting idea, someone should write it. And then I realized no one is going to write about left-arm spinners in Sri Lanka, so I thought I'd attempt it. But like I said, I was working in an ad agency, so I'd wake up at 4, write for 4 hours, go to work. And I didn't really see beyond finishing the story. And you got to shut out all the voices. Is it going to get published? Will anyone read it? You engage with the character. And I think when you do it for long, and if you do it every day, you start thinking like the character, talking the character's voice, and you just get immersed in that experience. But when it was done, to my surprise, it got published not only in the subcontinent, but in the UK and finally in America, who not known for their love of cricket. And then everyone asked me, what's your next trick? And I hadn't really thought about it. And in the interim, you know, I'd done a few silly things like get married and have 2 children. And I moved country twice.
Things.
Yeah, I thought it was a bad idea at the time. In hindsight, I think it's well, now they are 8 and 6, so at one point they were 3 and 1, and that was tough, very tough too. Now at least the door stays closed for at least a couple of hours a day. But, you know, I just remember thinking, now one thing I need to, I was also sick about writing about cricket, one thing. I mean, I was, you know, Sri Lanka won the '96 World Cup, and I was writing about that period. I was trying to write a story about Sri Lanka that didn't mention the war or ethnic conflict, was just about 2 guys who drank arak and watched cricket. And, but after doing that, I found myself invited on panels to talk about the game, and I'd stopped watching Sri Lankan cricket, because Sri Lankan cricket has been in decline for some years. So therefore I thought, okay, what can I do that's substantially different? And I thought, okay, what Sri Lanka needs is a good ghost story. And this idea of using the victims of Sri Lanka's wars, the many unsolved murders, and giving them a voice. And that's where Chats with the Dead, the original version, came out. So while I was doing it, again, it started off as a slasher horror around the tsunami. I thought it was a great idea, 10 aid workers on a bus, and one by one they get killed. But I couldn't make that work. Someone should write it. I certainly couldn't. But then, in the end, when I looked at the wreckage of that draft, the one thing that survived was the ghost on the bus. There was a ghost on the bus called a war photographer called Maali Almeida. And I thought, you know, forget all this slasher horror stuff. I should just tell the story of this ghost. And so you're doing it, and like I said, you know, the pandemic happened, it got published in the subcontinent, couldn't find a publisher, and so on. You just have this crazy belief that this book has some value and it's worth doing. But I also advocate holding on to the day job. So luckily also there's a robust freelance economy around advertising. And with the pandemic that got exacerbated. So suddenly I'm sitting in my pajamas, working on client work, and then, dealing with the kids. But also I made sure there was substantial time to do this. But the thing is, you don't really think about what's going to happen outside of that. You know that I wish I could write a book every year or a book every 2 years. That's always been my goal, or to write. I'm glad this book is much thinner than this. I don't know if you left some pages out or something. It's thinner, but it's heavier. But
I hope they're all there.
it smells great. That's the best.
Smell of a new book.
Yes. But so I, but it took as long as it took. I mean, every time I do, and during the pandemic, so we did Chats with the Dead. That was in 2020, just before, Jan 2020. And I mean, it did modestly okay, but I think people were preoccupied with the pandemic, but also it struggled to find a publisher outside the UK. Everyone said, no one remembers Sri Lanka's wars of '89. It's a difficult book. It's got demons and talking animals and yakas and hungry ghosts. And also, we don't understand your political situation because '89, and I remember it as a teenager, we had a separatist war with the LTT, the Tamil Tigers. There was a Marxist insurrection with the JVP. The Indian peacekeeping force had its boots on grounds, and there were also lots of foreign interests dabbling around in Sri Lanka. And if this was a thriller, the editor would say there's way too many plots here, but I was writing history, so I think that process was quite grueling. A book that you think is done, you spend another 2 years rewriting it. But yeah, I wasn't, like even up till October, I didn't think I had a career as a writer. I thought, okay, I'll do this book, because you don't take it for granted that your book, your little story written in Colombo is going to travel the world. But I suppose now there will be a third book. Someone will publish it, and hopefully it's good. If it's bad, it's going to get slammed. But at least now I know I have a career as a writer. But this is not something you take for granted as a South Asian writer.
It's pretty great. I mean, it has won the Booker. I mean, it has to be. So I'm just going to take a note here. Shehan mentioned twice that he kept his day job. So note to writers, until you're winning a lot of prizes, I think keep your day job.
No, because also, if I did go through periods where I'd quit. I used to work in ad agencies, and I was working in Singapore in ad agencies. I didn't even have time to read a book, forget writing one.
Of course, it's a grueling process, it's a long process, it's a solitary process. It's not just one draft. You keep working at it, it comes to you in some form, and it becomes completely something else.
No, it's a marathon. But also, when I quit, I'd have these lofty ambitions. I'm going to quit for 6 months, and I'm going to do a draft. And then when you spend 3 months and you've done 3 chapters and none of them work, and suddenly there's bills to pay, you get quite angsty. So I think keeping the day job, also with the freelance economy, you can kind of work as often or as less as you want. And that was good because then even if I've been mucking around all week trying to write a paragraph, I don't feel bad because at least the kids' fees are paid and no one's going hungry, and then I can spend 3-4 days of the week dreaming and talking to ghosts. So I think, that balance, I wonder, the great Damon Galgut is here, and he's been some sage advice, but he's just told me, you're not going to write another word for the next 12 months, just enjoy it and enjoy the ride. And
just talk about it.
I'm trying to prove him wrong. I wrote a paragraph yesterday. I don't know if it's any good, but those are small victories.
Of course. So just rewinding a little bit, I was talking to you earlier as well, and between Chinaman and Seven Moons, there was a 11-year gap. And you said that you worked on Seven Moons for 5 to 7 years. And I also know that your UK publisher did an edit, and it kind of, I think initially they felt that maybe the plot is, like you said, complicated, and we need to, kind of simplify it so it's palatable to the reader and it's kind of understandable. So how does it read now? Is it very different from what you initially wrote? Not the first draft, but what kind of, the book became versus what won the Booker Prize?
So it came out as Chats with the Dead. So that was the idea, Maali Almeida. So the concept is, the Seven Moons is, it's part of Sri Lankan culture, but I've seen it around South Asia as well. The idea that you have almsgiving after 7 days. So the spirit hovers around for 7 days or 7 moons, and before it goes to its final resting, or its next resting place. And also we have after 90 moons, 3 months we have an almsgiving. And the idea was this dead guy solving their own murder, and this dead guy happened to be a war photographer who was dealing with all these different factions. I still think, because I've been now the book came out in 2022, so every time I get roped into political discussions about what's going to happen to Sri Lanka, I said, look, I'm just a mystery novelist. I'm just writing a whodunit, which happened to have a bit of politics in it. And the whodunit, the convention is you have a dead body and then you have a number of likely suspects. So the likely suspects here were the different factions in Sri Lanka's wars. And Chats with the Dead was him going around interviewing different victims of 1989. And that was really the premise. What if Sri Lanka's dead were allowed to speak? Because the narratives keep getting changed after every tragedy. We just argue about whose fault it is. Okay, civilians died, but it wasn't our fault. It was those guys using them as human shields. And I thought if you
And
let
I know
the
you
dead...
mentioned different groups as well, that kind of operate within the society, and the power kind of, is held within the groups that you mentioned in the book as well. Also my question was that Chinaman was written in first-person point of view, and then you do Seven Moons, which is the second-person point of view, and which is something that writers stay away from, because it's very difficult to kind of run that through the entire book, and it's done so wonderfully. Right. Was it always going to be second person? It's almost like you're speaking to the reader, but you're not. You're talking to yourself. Was it going to be initially second person also, or did it start from something else and change into this?
So yeah, so the third book has to be in the third person now, which I've started, which is quite challenging. But the thing is this, every book I start is in the third person.
Okay.
I hope this one stays that way. So Chinaman was supposed to be a biography of Pradeep Matthew, and it was, Pradeep Matthew was born in 1965 in Moratua, and it traced his career. And I got bored of it myself. If the writer's getting bored of it, something's wrong. And it's only when I realized that a drunken uncle has to tell this story, a drunken sports journalist, it came alive. Suddenly I was able to stretch the truths, and I think you could argue the book became more about the drunken uncle than the mystery spinner. With this one, again, it was solving problems. So with the research for this, I visited a lot of haunted houses, I visited clairvoyants, watched a lot of horror movies, read classic ghost stories. And in the end, it was all wasted time. It was all procrastination, because with most ghost stories, the ghost appears perhaps in the third act, or perhaps not at all. That's what makes the horror movie scary. But in this, the ghost appears on page 1, saying, hi, I'm a ghost, and this is my story.
It's kind of like a spoiler on page 1, but really not, because you don't know who murdered him.
Yes, so that's the premise.
It's the blurb at the back, right? So I'm not giving any spoilers, but it actually talks about a dead man. So, you start with that, and you already know that something has happened before. So, you start with that, and obviously it builds on.
It's the opposite of the Sixth Sense, yeah, you know right away. But what I was thinking, okay, so now what does a disembodied... So firstly, I had to visualize what the afterlife looked like, what the rules of what does a ghost do all day long, can they go anywhere, can they talk to people, how does it work? So I had to build that world, which took a long time.
It's very well thought out. I could picture it, that there's this person like sort of giving out,
the afterlife as a bureaucracy, as a South Asian bureaucracy. So that took a long time to arrive at. But then I was thinking, okay, so what does Maali Almeida, I can describe what he looked like, but his body is being chopped up and dumped in a river. How can I describe him, and what does he sound like? And this took months to figure out, because I did do it in the third person, then in the first person. And I figured, okay, if anything survives the death of your body, it's perhaps the voice in your head. What that voice is, and the voice of your thoughts. I'd ask people to interrogate this themselves, because the voice in my head is in the second person. It's always someone...
it's like, what are you doing?
Yeah, someone's saying, yeah, you shouldn't have drunk so much water before the session, now you're going to have to wait another 45 minutes for the toilet. And it's someone else telling me, it's almost like a coach. I don't know if it's my conscience. So this idea that the voice in your head is in the second person, and also and the second person voice is not quite the Maali Almeida who lived from 1955 to 1990. It's almost like, is it the voice of his conscience? Is it the voice of his soul across many births? And an interesting thing was when the audiobook came out, and I had not very much to do with the narrator, Shivanta Vijayasinghe, but when he did his delivery, and he's done an excellent job, the second person narration voice and the voice of Maali Almeida in flashbacks is slightly different register. And I didn't brief him on it, but I thought it was very clever. It's almost like the voice telling the story is not quite the Maali Almeida who died and is recounting his life. So anyway, this is stuff that I pinned onto it later, and I think even the book it interrogates, what is the voice that tells you, whispers your thoughts to you? And I've often wondered that, like sometimes you do something and you think, what was I thinking? And you don't, you assume that your thoughts originate from you, but what if there are spirits hovering around, sitting behind everyone, whispering ideas in our heads while we sleep, and we wake up, you know, Inception, what if that is the case? And but this is all came later. I think that the test is when you find a voice, and for me a book doesn't exist until the voice exists. You can have a plot, you can have characters, you can have ideas, themes, but until a voice of how the sentences work on a molecular level, until that arrives, you don't have a book. So, like with WG, when I got a drunken uncle to write it, the pages flowed. And same, when I was doing it in the second person, you're sitting there watching your body being dismembered. It gave that distance, but also the pages flowed, so I went with it.
And even the characters, the triangle that you make with Maali, Jackie, and the minister's son, you know, it's you know, so believable somehow. You know, in a ghost story, you manage to give them personalities within the thought process that your photographer is having. Have you met anyone that one of the characters was inspired by, or did it just flow in? You know, did the characters just kind of keep adding on? And was there a character that kind of was added on later?
So I didn't quite answer your question about what the edits that Natanya. So Natanya Jans and Mark Ellingham have sort of books. You know, they were a little indie publisher who took this on, and initially I knew them. I used to write travel stories for them, so they're very generous editors and very generous with their feedback. And so initially when they agreed to take this on, the first problem to be solved was, let's make sure a Western reader is not alienated by all these different factions and this mythology. So initially it was just making it, at least the first 50 pages, we established what the ghost rules are. You can go where the wind goes, you can go where your name is spoken, so on, and establish that he has 7 days to solve his murder, what the light represents. All of that was done very quickly. But also it was the pandemic, so suddenly we are being told 2021 this book will not get published, you have to wait till 2022 September. So suddenly there's another 12 months to go. And so then we started tinkering, and one of the things was Maali Almeida's relationships, because one of the bits of feedback was he's not very likable. And I don't know if he's still likable even in the final version.
Do you agree that your protagonist has to be likable?
I don't think it does. I don't think so.
I don't think either, but like it's apparently a global, you know, publishing thing that you have to like your protagonist.
Not like, you just have to want what they want, or at least see what they want.
Care about them.
Yeah, because now say WG in Chinaman, I mean he has some unlikable characteristics. He's a drunkard and not very nice to his family, but I would probably have a drink with him and watch a cricket match. He seems to be a character I'd like to spend time with. I'm not sure I'd like to hang out with Maali Almeida. He seems quite a self-centered, arrogant, self-important guy. But yeah, one of the things was, let's look at his relationships with his boyfriend, with his girlfriend, with his mother. He's got plenty of daddy issues. Yeah. And I think Natanya, and then suddenly September comes and it's like, okay, we're not going to release in 2021, it'll be 2022. And then it was, I think it's working well, but the beginning is still a bit confusing. The ending doesn't quite land and the middle's a bit boring. But apart from that, it's great. Can we just fix these things? And the other thing that she said, which stayed with me, was, because there's a lot going on, right? It's a murder mystery. Also, there's a political thriller element. So he's a war photographer. He's taken these photographs that he believes can end the civil war, which are in a box under his bed. So there's a political thriller element. Where are the photographs? Who wants to get their hands on them? But also, like you rightly said, there's a love triangle at the center of it. And I think that's the real heart of the book. And and I think that plot also, as well as, there's ghosts, there's talking animals.
I mean, there is a lot going on. I just kind of, because your characters end up making your story, no matter how much is going on. Because at the end of the day, you need to understand their journey. And I think you did that so well, even though there's so much about Sri Lankan society and politics. But for me, personally, as a reader, I think that triangle really, made me care about all three of them. and their motivations, and I really wanted him to find out who murdered him, you know, because I'm like, no, this, he deserves to know and I deserve to know, you know, and that's what keeps the book going, right?
So yeah, so the advice was, let's make sure all the instruments aren't playing at once. And so let's just move the scene over here. Let's just make sure the pacing isn't, and there's not too many ideas happening. So yeah, it starts off as an amnesia tale. It sort of almost becomes a revenge tale. But I also think it also becomes a love story, a love triangle. And I think just making sure those elements were not clashing with each other, this is the skill of a great editor. And I think, so asking Chats with the Dead versus Seven Moons, it's the same book. It roughly begins and ends the same way and has the same characters. But I think Seven Moons is perhaps takes out a lot of the digressions. We've added a few more scenes to kind of deepen the relationships and all that. But I just think it's pacier, and it's obviously benefits from 2 years of a writer and editor with nothing to do but stay at home and tinker with this manuscript. So I think it's benefited from that. But strangely enough, now in Sri Lanka, Chats with the Dead is still selling. And I know it's really confusing to have the same book under two titles, two versions of the same book. So I think in the end, Chats with the Dead will be phased out and this will become the definitive text. But in Sri Lanka, there's still a feeling that this was originally the one written for us and this is the one that we should read the original version. But it's strange. Hopefully the next book I just have to write once and it doesn't have to be edited and it's good to go in a year.
Of course.
We can dream, yeah.
So Shehan, both of your books thematically do talk about they both hold up a mirror, you know, talks about Sri Lankan society, and you manage to do that with satire. And there are spaces, you know, even in Chinaman and Seven Moons that you end up chuckling. You know, you read something and you end up just, you know, with a smile. And I know that you quote Muhammad Hanif saying that, you know, I would rather have a peaceful society, peaceful country, and bad books. So, you know, how do you manage to turn that into something that the reader will understand, the reader will be able to absorb and smile about? Because obviously, you know, there are a lot of murders and a lot of dead bodies, and yet you come out with like a, you know, happy feeling when you read the
that's
book.
good. That's good. All these corpses and you come up with a feel-good feeling. That's great. Yeah, I'm saving my Muhammad Hanif thing for my keynote address because
Sorry, I mentioned because
I've
I've been looking at the interviews everywhere. So
yes, because look, Exploding Mangoes was a huge influence.
And he says hi to you, by the way.
Oh,
so he's not in town, but
all right. That was a huge influence. I mean, that's a riot, and it's also quite a depressing, dark book. And yeah, I remember that came out. Manu Joseph's Serious Men, White Tiger, I suppose, where it's got that kind of humorous edge to it. This was not something contrived. Like I suppose the first book is about a guy drinking himself to death, but it's you know, he's a drunken uncle. He's got this very strange way of looking at the world, and obsessed with cricket, and sees cricket as being more important than whatever's happening in Sri Lanka. And I just think I pick narrators who if there's a common thread at all, it's absurdity. I think the Sri Lankan, even you look at the harrowing year we had, and you know, we've both been in Iowa last year. I was in Iowa writing my third novel, biking up and down that river, and then I turn on Twitter and Sri Lanka is burning. And I was getting palpitations, anxiety. My family's there, my parents are there. And for a while, you know, you have this heavily armed guard and these ragtag students taunting them. And it could have ended in a very different way. But what do we remember? We remember storming of the castles, jumping in the president's pool, doing belly flop, you know, guys soaping themselves in the president's pool, sitting on the president's couch watching his TV while Sri Lanka beat Australia, and you know, having these mock IMF deals where the guys in their caps were doing. And this is, even in such a grim time, the jokes never stop. It just seems like we have this absurdity.
You know, it's just kind of a way to deal with what's going on, you know, to understand what's going on around you, and just, I guess, a lighter...
But it's telling, because 10 years ago, the same regime was feared, in the sense if you were a journalist and you wrote about the regime. We had Lasantha Wickramatunga, the iconic editor, gunned down in broad daylight. We had journalists getting disappeared, and this inkling that if you speak too much, a white band will turn up and disappear you, that as a verb. And then 10 years later, somehow the entire populace was emboldened, not just on the streets, shouting at the regime, making jokes of them, making fun of them, also on social media. Whenever a politician tried to wrest the narrative away, Twitter would pile on them and just mock them and make fun of them. And it just seems that I've talked a lot about the Sri Lankan smile and Sri Lankan humor. Look, I also wrote tourist board commercials and Sri Lankan Airlines commercials as my day job. So I've written about the Sri Lankan smile, about our warm hospitality, our childlike friendly people, which is also true, but also I think the Sri Lankan smile is a sinister thing. We smile when we're angry. We smile. Lots of hamburgers and beer and a few shootouts, I have to say. Yeah, so you stay indoors, and I ended up writing a lot, and you know it's quite, you also meeting the other writers and you're getting inspired by them.
Quite lovely.
So it was a great time. The only problem was I was looking at the news back home and just getting real anxiety over it. But yeah, I started the third book there. I haven't written much apart from the paragraph yesterday since then. So I do miss those times of being able to just write the whole time and not talk to anyone.
Of course. So Shehan, how does censorship work in Sri Lanka? You mentioned that, you know, Chats with the Dead was initially done in Sri Lanka, and you also mentioned that, you know, some journalists were shot down and kind of reprimanded for writing. So when you were writing, were you at any point scared that you're going to be held accountable for mentioning certain organizations, or, you know, just, you know, as a writer, you do self-edit and you also self-censor. Did these thoughts bother you at some point in your writing process?
So for sure, like, you don't take freedom of speech seems to be a God-given right in the West. It's not something we take for granted in South Asia, because you know there are real consequences if you offend the wrong person. With Chinaman, I remember being worried because they are very thinly veiled. I call cricketers Hashan, Mahanama, Asanka, De Silva, and all that, thinking I'm being very clever. And I spoke to some lawyers, and they said, well, you're not being clever because you're pissing off two people rather than one person. And I said, is there a chance that there'll be, you know, libel, or can I get into trouble for this? And they said, no, not really, because, you know, firstly, a famous cricketer suing you will be great for book sales for a debut novelist, which never happened. Also,
controversy, it always gets the attention. Yeah.
Imagine if, one of the heroes of '96 had sued that book, you would have been, but also, for them to prove libel, they have to go into court and say that womanizing, match-fixing alcoholic cricketer is based on me, and no one's going to do that. So, so with that, but I did get a legal read. Now with this one, the idea came to me around 2011, 12, in the post-war period, and I remember, like I told you, there was a lot of hope then, a lot of expat Sri Lankans, many from my generation who'd lived abroad were coming back, starting businesses, starting companies, trying to build something. And yet, that final phase of the war, where initially they said there was 0 civilian casualties, they couldn't keep that story up. So the numbers vary, 10, 20, 30, I've heard 40,000 civilians died. And there were the arguments, not really looking at the causes, let's make sure this never happens again, let's make sure there's truth and reconciliation, all of that stuff. No, what happened was just the battle of the documentaries. Everyone arguing over, well, the civilians died, but it was the Tigers using as human shields, here's the evidence, and then there's evidence that the government shelled them. And I was like, 3 years they were just arguing this stuff, and meanwhile, people were still in camps, parents were still holding up photographs of their missing children, and none of those wounds were addressed. And so I was really thinking, what if the dead could speak, to write about that period? But that's when I realized writing about contemporary stuff, even writing about 2022, can be dangerous. And that's why, but you know, unfortunately, Sri Lanka's got many massacres for me to choose from. So I went back to 1989. I mean, I could have gone to, 2003 or 1995, but I went to 89 because I remembered it, like I said, having 3 different factions. And I remember going to school and dead bodies on the street, bodies burning in tires, and you didn't know who they were. They could have been the army, they could have been JVP, they could have been suspected Tigers, because everyone was killing everyone at that time. And I thought, okay, maybe this is a period to set a murder mystery. But also, I thought most of the people who could take offense are dead. Most of the people, the protagonists, the antagonists are dead.
That's a foolproof plan.
And so therefore, and people don't, 89 seems like ancient history, even though it's, our lifetimes. We're not talking about the Easter attacks, 2019. Again, there are many narratives around that, many conspiracy theories, how that happened and how it suddenly disappeared. But we tend to just come up with these narratives and then discard it and move on to, well, that's in the past, let's not bring that stuff up. And so 89, I didn't feel worried because so much time had passed and it was a different government in charge. The government in 2010 were like in the opposition. They were peace activists. They were human rights activists at that time. And I thought, no one's probably going to take offense as long as I do my research properly. So I didn't worry about that. But I still, with my short stories, I left out a couple of short stories just because I, chatted to the editor. Editor said, no, let's keep this in. This is powerful.
Unnecessarily.
No, I thought, there was one that could have been offensive to certain religious groups. And, you think, is the story that good that it's worth being stabbed or punched over? And you end up thinking, well, perhaps not. Maybe I write something about something silly and just put it in there. So you do have that act as well. But I do think that Sri Lankan writers writing in English firstly, I think fiction writers have that insulation. When you're a journalist and you're dealing with facts and pointing fingers, that's far more dangerous than a fiction writer. Also, perhaps because the powers that be who could take offense maybe don't read fiction. I could be wrong. I hope I'm wrong. But so there's that. And also, as a fiction writer, you're using, like Mohsin Hamid uses allegory, Hanif uses satire. You're using these devices to distance yourself. But also, the fact that I'm writing in English means that, again, even if someone's taking offense, it's they think, now writing in Sinhala, I know a Sinhala short story writer who wrote about sexual abuse in the Buddhist clergy, and he was jailed for 2 years. He was a bit more of an activist than me, and they asked him to apologize, and he was like, no, this is my story. But because he was writing in Sinhala, because that thing has farther reach, and
for us, that's Urdu. So even in Pakistan, English fiction kind of gets away with a lot because we have, obviously limited readers. But Urdu is more widespread, and then, if the story gets into the hands of somebody who might take offense, then there's a similar process that,
So I think I have those two layers of protection. But also, look, I'm not making stuff up. This period was very well documented, and predominantly Sri Lanka has been, outpourings of love and congratulations because it was a torrid year, and the cricket team won the Asia Cup, and one of our actors won the Olivier Award, Hiran, and the Booker happened, and it was, people were rejoicing for that. But there are always trolls. So there is a minority of commentators who say, well, this is how you win international awards. You portray Sri Lanka as a backward island full of savages killing each other, and you sell that to the West and you win award. If only it were that easy.
They say this is what the West wants, and you have to be an ambassador for your country and write good things,
So I've written travel commercials, I've written airline commercials, so I played that end of the street as well. But again, this is not like the book has talking animals and talking demons, but the facts of 89 are, if you go and read the real history, it's far more gruesome than anything in the book.
So Shehan, do you have, who's your toughest critic? Has there been a constant sort of person who you reach out to in your writing and whose criticism you value? And obviously, each book has their own editor and kind of a team working on the book as well. But is there a constant friend, a fellow writer that you kind of would call your toughest critic?
Well, see, this is something as a writer, if you find a good first reader, you should buy them drinks and meals and hug them a lot, and because it's so valuable. And preferably not someone who you're in a romantic relationship or married to.
Not a good idea.
Ideally that would be the case, but I remember my wife reading Chinaman and saying, I think it's a nice, lovely little story, but don't feel bad if no one gets into it, because people who watch cricket don't read books, and people who read books don't care about cricket, which both Both are very patently false statements. But yeah, thankfully they are. But no, I have a few friends who are. You got to have someone who is kind, who is has a filter which usually your spouse won't have, who will
Also doesn't steal your story.
Yeah, doesn't steal your story.
Because if you're sending out, very early drafts, right? I mean, if it's not somebody you trust, then it kind of...
So I don't send early drafts. I stopped doing that because early drafts, either they're going to praise it and you're not going to improve it, or they're going to criticize it and you're going to be demoralized. I usually get it to a fairly finished stage before I share it. But yeah, you need someone kind, but you also need someone who's going to tell you when your writing's bad and tell you when stuff is boring, but do it in a kind way. So I have a few of those readers who I cherish, and I use them in different shifts. I don't like inflict the same draft on them over and over again. But also I have to say, Natanya again, she's, because before even she signed on as editor, I'd send her short stories and,
so it was somebody you kind of already had, a rapport with and a relationship with.
And she was, we didn't have a publishing relationship, but she'd send back the short stories with, great edits, and she'll tell me if something's not working, and again, be very kind about it. I've had agents and all who, you send stuff, everything you send is terrific. Oh, terrific stuff. I'll put it in the New Yorker next week, and you don't hear from them ever again. And so you'd rather have someone saying, well, that one is not working, you may want to put that aside.
And give their suggestion, if there's a loophole or a plot gap or, whatever it is, they give you feedback and then you end up making it better. I mean, you can't take all feedback, obviously, but the ones that you
No, you don't. But if someone, there's a saying, I think it's in publishing, if enough people tell you you're drunk, you should sit down. And I think that's true. If maybe they're wrong, maybe the book wasn't for them, but if enough people tell you this scene with bodies being fed to cats is quite gruesome, you should probably take it out of the book.
Don't do it.
Maybe you should listen to them. Yeah.
Sure. So, Shehan, I'm just going to ask you one last question and then we're going to open up for questions. Do you think that writers have to be gifted to write, or can it be a learned craft?
So I explored this thing when I was doing Chinaman, about talent. Because I was a fairly talented left-arm spinner. I could bowl a decent googly, I could bowl the top spinner, but I'd also bowl like 4 full tossers every over and get whacked. And the thing is, because, I was bowling left-arm spin, and there weren't many, this is before Shane Warne and Murali. I think Abdul Qadir was the great spinner of that time, and everyone was trying to bowl like the West Indian fast bowlers. So because I was unusual, I had a bit of talent, I'd get selected for the team. But by the end of the season, I'd be on the reserve bench because I never turn up to practice. I never go to the nets and do all of that. And I do think the analogy holds for any craft. I mean, okay, it's true that some kids can run faster than others, some kids can write, some kids can draw. But I think, I studied English and I tended to write every day. But in my 20s, I was a terrible writer, and I think I wrote, there's lots of unpublished novels sitting under a box under my bed that will never see the light of day. But I think the difference is this, and even with this 7 Moons, it was that slasher horror called Devil Dance, and I wrote 300 pages. And this is a thing the other, writers in the room will relate to, is that it takes just as long to write a terrible book as it does to write a good book. And that's the depressing thing. That's why I would never judge a short story or book competition, because even if it's terrible, you think, this poor person spent 6 months actually typing this crap. And so, you go through that, but I think the difference between writers and civilians, if you like, is that, normal people will write something bad and think, oh, well, I should probably do something better with my time. A writer will do that, feel depressed, and then they'll come back maybe a few months later and read it and think, well, actually that sentence is not bad, this character's not bad, maybe I'll give it another go. And it's in the rewriting, and this is a cliche in all writing classes, but it's in the rewriting that the thing evolves, and I'm sure there's a cooking analogy here, but right up till, souffle I think is the analogy, right up till you may be writing for, let's say, 3 years, right up to 2 months and 2 years and 10 months, the book is terrible. It's only that last bit that it's somehow everything falls into place. So you have to stay at the distance. I think that's the difference between writers. So you can and there's plenty of advice. There's MFA programs, there's YouTube, there's great writers have written about writing tips. But in the end, I think the real writers just tend to keep going and rewriting. And I realized that in my 30s, that even a bad story, you shouldn't throw it away, because you keep rewriting it, somehow it might emerge into something. So it is a gift to a certain extent, but I don't think anyone can go on gifts alone. Otherwise, I would be in the Sri Lankan cricket team bowling my bad left arm spin, but unless I'm prepared. And I heard, I did a biopic of Murali, which hopefully should come out this year. And I heard that he used to get nervous every single game. He used to lock himself in the toilet, vomit, and you see the guy on the pitch, he's smiling, and every time he gets given the ball, he takes 5 wickets. But after the game, he'd be in the nets practicing. Same with Sangha, all the greats would do that. So I think that is the difference, the stuff you don't see. The talent is fine, and and that's what really.
And then discipline and perseverance and kind of, staying with it.
So I think you can have someone with no talent who puts in the work, can get to a certain stage, rather than the talented person who doesn't put in the work. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Shehan. It was absolutely lovely speaking to you.
Thank you.
I have so many more questions, but I think I'll let the audience ask now.
Sure.
Hi, Shehan. Firstly, congratulations. I read Chinaman, me and my friends, read it in 2012. We were rooting for you at that time also for the DSF prize, and you won. We were rooting for you for the Booker, and you won. And it's really great when you root for someone and they win.
Yeah, you guys are good luck. Root for my next book.
Will do. And there were some things that you said today which really, firstly, the one comment you made about when your wife said, and about the cricketers who love, people who love cricket don't love books, and people who love books don't really care about cricket. So I am one of the latters, but I know a lot of the formers who I gifted the book to, and I insisted that they read them, and everyone loved it. So even non-book loving people, or people who never read fiction, love Chinaman. And I think even though, I read it twice, and Pradeep met you, and his story, and the way you did it, it was just brilliant. And what we loved about your book, and I think some of my friends here would agree with me, is that unlike other South Asian authors, with all due respect, I felt that your books were not catering to a Western audience, per se. They were about Sri Lanka, they were for Sri Lankans, and yet as South Asians, we could relate to it, which is something that is very seldom found in South Asian books. At least as a reader, I feel that. Obviously, everybody does not have to agree with me. There was an interesting thing we had found out when we read Chinaman, was that when it won the Grecian Prize, the Sri Lankan Prize in 2008, you were not able to find any publishers for it internationally, and it was quite a home affair, like your wife and your brother-in-law and your brother, they all came together and put the book together, and then finally you found Chiki, and she published it, and she edited 100 pages out from it. And you mentioned the editing process. So when you're writing, how much, once a writer has finished that and you've shown some trustworthy person your script, and is the editing process as important, because you mentioned about that, is the editing process as important as the initial writing process? Do you feel that with your books, that the editing, because you have talked about that. So do you think it's like a 50-50 relationship or a 60-40? How do you think that works?
Yeah, well, I hope I don't have to write the next book twice. It seems like I'm doomed to write everything twice. Yeah, you're right, Chinaman, we self-published it. It was about 500, 600 pages long, and then Cheeky condensed it, and same with this, 2 years of rewriting. The thing, it's strange because for someone who spent 2 years rewriting a book for the Western audience, for me to say that I don't write for Western audiences. But it's true, because the first, when you're writing the first draft, the initial idea, you can't be thinking, is an editor in London gonna like this? Is the publisher in New York, what are they gonna say? What's the Guardian gonna say? Those are irrelevant conversations. You're thinking, okay, I'm writing for someone like me. I'd be interested in a book about a left-arm spinner or a ghost solving their own murder in '89. And you think it may travel to around the subcontinent. So you're writing for South Asian readers as well. But when it comes to the editing process, then you're thinking of a global audience and you have these conversations. Do we put in a glossary? Which I hate doing. I hate footnotes, I hate glossaries. And also, because also I think if you think about the Western audience when you're writing, suddenly you've got to explain everything. So if the character's having a kottu roti, you've got to then a paragraph explaining what a kottu roti is. And that's going to take me a month because I don't write food very well. And then every time you're signposting it with these, and I think for us the solution is, okay, if it's going to alienate someone, if someone's going to not be able to confuse someone, then maybe you need to have some clarity there. But you can do that within the context. I mean, we read Philip brought the Saul Bellow, where I have a lot of Yiddish words in there. There's no glossary or anything, and when I was reading it, there was no Google, but you kind of, through the context, you're able to absorb the story, and I think that's what we did, and keeping in South Asian words and so on. But I think ultimately, and I've thought about this a lot, especially when you spend, I mean, I've written 2 books in 15 years. I wish I could get a bit faster, but during that process, you think, okay, what's the measure of this success? Is it gonna, and you can't, no one expects to win a Booker Prize or a DSC Prize. These are all lotteries and you don't know if the thing's gonna sell. But for me, the measurement is if someone, maybe on the other side of the planet, can have an experience with the book, if they know nothing about left arm spin or Sri Lanka or JVP or LTT, they can still pick up the book and have an experience. I think that's the measure of a good book. And that's what you try, and that's all that's in your power as a writer. You can't control how it's published and how it's received. So I think that's really how I approach everything, and it's a lot better for mental health, because then that's your only job. And so therefore there were concessions. I think with Chinaman, there are like these little diagrams that my brother drew explaining what a bat, a ball. Yeah, and there's photographs, and just explaining, what a googly is, what a doosra is, and all that, just so that even if you know nothing about cricket, by page 50, you know enough that you can read the story. But your question about editing, I mean, I don't know what the ratio is. Is it 50-50? I'm not sure it's 50-50, because you can't edit a blank page. You do need the initial thing. But I'd say it's certainly 70-30, maybe even 60-40 in some cases. But it is a valuable part of the process. And I think Sri Lankan writing does suffer from lack of editors, because I see a lot of writers, they kind of finish the draft and then they send it to the printers, and you can see that on the pages. But yeah, so I'm grateful. Chiki Sarka and Natanya, I had some terrific editors, but yeah, I think it's an essential part of the process. Certainly I'd say 60-40 at least. Yeah.
Share a little more about your guitars. We heard about your family and about your unfinished stories, but what about the guitars?
The guitars. Yeah, I bought a drum kit as well. So yeah. I didn't waste that Booker money. I put it to good use. So I bought a drum. And during the pandemic, I bought a keyboard. So I'm surrounded in this room with 5 guitars and a keyboard and a drum kit and my books and writing desk. I'm not a very talented musician, and I think, again, this is telling, like I didn't practice my left arm spin. I don't practice guitar every day, but I write every day. But now I'm trying to force myself to do that, because it's also a good, it's a good brain exercise. You write for 2 hours, you go and play a scale, or you bash the drums for like 10-15 minutes. That kind of, I don't know, cleanses the brain or uses a different side of it. But yeah, so I think my excuse is now my kids are learning music, so I need to have all these instruments in the house. But I don't think there's going to be an album or a performance anytime soon. I can't sing or dance or play very well, but it's something that gives me a lot of pleasure, and I think it helps the writing. Yeah.
Thank you, everyone. I think we're out of time. Thank you.
Thank you very much.